I'd like to call to order the Light Board meeting for January 25th. First order is meetings. We have upcoming meetings. Our next meeting is February 8th. And then we have another one on February 22nd before our March meeting. And I want to do minutes, and then I'll give a quick statement. So Pam, you said that the minutes for November 9th look ready to go. Oh, I think you're muted.
Okay. Yes, and I heard back from Alice last night, so now I have comments. I had comments from Wendy and Warren that were, and Allison, you approved, it seems, this morning. So I recommend that we move forward with those. Just before I cede the floor here, the December minutes, 7th, I think. I just sent those out to you, and if you could follow the kind of suggested response time to me, then maybe we can get those done. Those are the only ones that I've gotten in. There's still some outstanding ones from there's December 14th and January 11th. And then we're going to be having, assuming we have additional meetings, we'll have additional minutes. So that's my update. Okay, great. Do you want to make a motion to approve the minutes for November 9th? I move that we approve the minutes for November 9th. And do I have a second? I see. Great. So Wendy gave a second. So Wendy?
Approve.
Pam?
Yes.
Warren?
Yes.
Alice?
Yes.
And I agree as well. So great. We've approved the minutes. I wanted to give a quick statement before we get started on the agenda. Some people have commented on the fact that the chair is doing a lot of this agenda. This is a setup. This is for us to prepare staff for doing the work of pulling together a time of use. We want to hear from the board opinions on the topics in the agenda. So it is not a prescripted idea. It is something to start with so that we can all give our opinions and then begin work. And then we'll come back to the board with more information at a later meeting. And also, we have quite a lot of things on our to-do list to get done. So I want to let you know that we are going to focus on the middle school solar at the next meeting, because we're going to be having the public meeting at the end of that month. So we need to spend our time on February 8th. Thinking about that and other routine topics that may come up between now and then. So we have a lot of work to do, and today is about getting the board's input on what they'd like to see in a time of use rate, such that we can develop that with staff and come back with something that is in your mind of what you see as a time of use, because it can go very many different ways. So with that, I'd like to do a presentation on the goals and to kind of give an overview. I sent this out to all of you to take a look at. So I'm just going to go through it for the public, and then I'll take your feedback. Does that sound okay? All right. I just present. Oh, sorry, I have to, when I put it in presenter mode, it covers my Zoom screen. Give me a quick second.
Brian?
Yeah?
Are the materials that we were provided for this meeting available online, so that what I don't want to do is spend a lot of time informing just the public in this? If all the materials are available to the public, and we may not have to go through screen by screen on this.
Well, I would like to go through the presentation.
I know you would like to, but I would like to, you said it was for the benefit of the public.
It's also
this is a board meeting. The materials were sent in advance. We had 2 copies of this. We had the PowerPoint and we had a written version of it. So the board, hopefully the board has been prepared and has read the materials in advance of the meeting. So I'm happy for you to go through it, but I don't want to spend a great deal of time since I think we've all done our homework as board members and responsible for this at our level.
Now, Brian, I would just chime in. I think one thing I'm thinking as we have these additional meetings is efficiency is extremely important. I mean, these extra meetings are costly for the staff certainly, and they're costly for the board. So my point would be absolute efficiency in these meetings that these special meetings we're having, and only to the extent that we absolutely need them.
The process is not working if we keep discussing about our workload and we don't actually start doing the work. So I would like to make this presentation because I don't believe that everybody has done the homework and is up to speed. I would like to go over this so that everybody knows the questions being asked and we can get your input on this. This is the most efficient way I can see to get this work done. Please let me proceed. All right, can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Thank you. So why are we looking at time of use? We are looking at it now because we're getting the capability to do it. In the past, our rate structure has been designed around our current capabilities, which were very limited. And we had many workarounds to incentivize technology to be able to provide the public with what they desired without the true capability to do it well. We have invested into the NSIC billing system. We've invested into the AMS system so that we now have a modern billing system and a modern metering system. So we now have data and a way to manage that data for billing purposes. So what is the opportunity here with this new capability? It's the ability to equitably engage our customers with charging them for the expenses that they create through their behavior. It is a simplified way of providing a rate structure that they can understand. It is an efficient use of CMLP and meeting our revenue needs. It is a way to give customers a financial signal for what is the most cost-effective way to deliver electricity and allow them to save on their bill, and when they do that, to be able to save on our expenses so we can lower rates. And this enables scaling of our electrification efforts and having people put their own capital in so that we could reach our climate goals. So the design approach that we should take is to understand that these new capabilities allow us to have a fresh start on our legacy rate system, to rethink the way that we approach our rates. We need to understand the load and how load impacts our expenses at the utility and how customer behavior interacts with load. And then if we can categorize the expenses correctly, we can create a rate structure that allows for the collection, the full collection of all the shared expenses, those things, the distribution, the operations, everything related to things where customer behavior does not affect, where we can get full collection for that. But also, when people conserve, like the tiered structure is supposed to provide in the R1, they can save money that way by being more efficient. But also, when they use electricity, that load shifting to level out our load and lower our peak expenses to be able to offer better rates to our customers. So understanding those expenses and putting that into a design that is time of use and fairly collects for those expenses based on those activities, we can then create a better rate structure to encourage that investment and that scaling. Now, there are some of our rates that we cannot get rid of. We want to keep our rate assistance rate that provides about a 50% support for those income qualified. We were required by law to offer that farm discount of 10%. The NIPA, the PCA, the undergrounding. These are all initiatives that went through either town meeting or through state law that we have to provide. Now, when we talk about these expenses and what is a cost to operate, what is a fixed expense, what is something that's passed through, most of the pass-through costs are within the purchase power, the power supply. The cost to operate the plant and the depreciation, all of those other factors are more of ideally being a fixed collection, where we charge people $70 a month as residents to collect for those without any risk of weather affecting meeting our target of collection. But that level of $70 is too high and is not something customers will agree to. So there will be some variable collection, which we have to balance how much we do is fixed and how much we do is variable, because of that risk of having a mild year and under collecting, or having huge storms and heat waves that end up over collecting. And then when it comes to the power supply, we need to look at our contracts and we need to say, okay, this is our average cost of generation. Here's what we're collecting for capacity. Here's what we're collecting for transmission fees. And then we have to look at contracts like the Watson contract, which is a peaker plant. That is mostly a capacity contract, but in our current rate structure, we're dealing with it as a distribution expense, as something equivalent to trucks and salaries. So the reason we need to consider these things is that when we design a rate, and this is just an example, but if we need to be able to look at the load that is going through the substation, which is that red line in the chart. And then we need to say, well, these variable costs, we want to collect every hour of the day. That would be generation and any distribution costs, because anytime you're using power, you need that generation. So you should pay for that. Capacity is a peak expense often in the summer, and is a very large expense for the light plant. So we should collect that whenever load goes above the average load. So if you see that black dotted line, that's the average load of 20 megawatts in the summer. And anytime that red line goes above that black dotted line, we should be having a mid-peak, a time when electricity gets a bit more expensive, to tell people, well, I'd rather you use it at 5 a.m. in the summer, because we don't have a lot of load at 5 a.m. and it doesn't cost us a lot of money to provide you electricity, so we shouldn't charge you for all of these peak expenses. You'll see that the on-peak time is our transmission cost. So this is when the hours around dinner time, when businesses are still open and consuming power, people are going home and starting to turn on lights and other devices, and we have our peak loads. So the 4 hours around the peak would be a great time to give an on-peak message. And that could be done with collecting all of our R&S fees, all of the cost for getting power from the generators to Concord. And there's a seasonal component to this. You'll see in the 8 months around the winter, our load has changed. It is no longer 5 a.m. is definitively our low load. There is a solar saturation. We have a midday where we have a low load. Also, the average load for these 8 months has dropped by 2 megawatts. It's now at 18. So we want to keep those R&S fees the same and keep that on peak, but it drops because our capacity collection can drop, because we don't hit our New England capacity hour for the forward capacity markets during these 8 months. So we should collect some, but we don't need to collect all. And you'll notice also that in the morning, there's a little peak, and in the evening there's a big peak, and capacity is broken up such that we can give that signal to our customers about that mid peak in the morning to say, hey, it does cost us a little bit more when it goes above the average here. And importantly, the reason that I describe not a value for on peak and a value for off peak is that by relating our expenses that customers can affect, like RNS, to the on peak and capacity to anything above the average, we now have the ability to give credits to those with battery storage or those with solar that can feed back into our system when we need it. Now, this encourages our customers to invest into home energy storage because they can charge off peak and then run their own home during peak. This is not something we can scale with incentives. Incentives are taking shared money and putting it towards a technology or an action. We can't continue that because we need to get 50% or more of the town to really electrify everything. And so we need a rate structure that is unsubsidized and fair to the other customers, but also rewards those that are doing the investments we need to level our load. And that's what I've been pushing for. And I know I have very strong opinions on this, but I am not going to bully this through. I am going to take your feedback and I'm going to listen, and we're going to have staff do the work. And then we're going to agree that these things make practical sense and then move forward. So I really want your feedback on the content of this so that we can work with staff to really move this forward and drive it to conclusion so we actually get a time of use rate designed before the meters are here. So here's a summary slide, kind of says the same thing. I will stop sharing and allow us to see each other again. Thank you for listening. I want to ask, what are your thoughts on this basic structure of time of use rate? Alice?
I have a couple of thoughts. One of the things that you said is that you need 50% of the homes to electrify with battery storage for this to be effective. That's
No.
4,000 people. I'd like to, that is what you said, at least that's what I heard you say. 4,000, we needed 50% of our residents need to invest in electrification and battery storage for this to
No,
work.
not battery storage.
Okay.
Just
Then how are you feeding back during the peak hours where power is needed if there isn't a battery storage option? I think you said that people will invest because we need them to be part of the supply. All right. Well, you can answer the question. And I have a second question about incentive.
That'd be fine. So we need 50% of our population to electrify to do a 60% reduction in emissions in town. That was scoped out in the wedge analysis from the greenhouse gas inventory from years ago. It does not require battery storage, but it does require people to switch their heating systems, their vehicles over to electricity. Now, if we keep a flat rate structure, we are going to have greater peaks and greater troughs. The idea is to create a rate structure that gives signals to the customer based on the load each year. That way, people can decide when they want to run devices based on a pricing signal. It does not require battery storage. So I agreed with all of your comments except for the battery storage.
Fine. So let me add the second question is, this makes some assumptions about consumer behavior. One of the things that we found with you said price incentives will drive behavior. And I think that we have experience, and nationally, there is a lot of data about this, that the cost of power has not been a driver in the masses deciding that they want to save a little bit by moving their dinner hour to 9 o'clock at night or doing laundry at the off-peak hours, that it hasn't been a significant driver in consumer behavior. So I don't want to go on the assumption that that's what we're trying to do. I understand time of use rates. I understand why we want to use them. I think even in the last cost of service study, it looked at three time of use rates for peak, off-peak, and mid-peak. And so I just want to make sure we're not dismissing the last cost of service study that did do a rate design that shifted the cost between our power supply and our fixed costs, and looked at how we could implement the time of use rate. I don't want to start from ground zero. It may be time for us to hire a consultant and go back to doing an update to our cost of service study. But I would rely on the experts who have designed rates across utilities across the country to help inform us, and not from us starting at ground zero. For those of us on the board for a couple of years or more, we spent hours and hours on the cost of service study and understand the basis of time of use rates.
So this suggested time of use rate is for fare collection. It is not to be utilized as an incentive. I hope that by sharing the costs with customers, that they will be incentivized to do things. But a good example of where this rate is not good for an environmentally good technology would be induction ovens. This is not an incentive for induction ovens because most people cook dinner, and that's during that peak hours. But yeah, induction ovens are a great technology for home health, for many other purposes. So this is not a suggestion of trying to mold behavior. This is reflection of expenses incurred by customers, and we're not sharing the expense one customer is creating by running an air conditioner in the middle of the capacity hour with everybody else. So, Wendy.
So I guess, Brian, I don't know how to react to your presentation. What I'm hearing are principles of things you want to move to, but I'm not seeing your discussion as, I don't want to view it as a rate proposal, but I
No, I don't either.
Right. I sort of want to concur with Alice. I want to sort of hear from our internal experts on an approach, but I did hear something new for the first time in our time of use discussions. And one is we've generally talked about incentives to move behavior by consumers. And I'm all for that. That's what time of use is about. But I'm also hearing you introduce a new type of incentive, which is consumers and leveraging their investment in battery storage. And, that's an extension of what we've heard for solar. So I think as a board, we need to sort of talk about the principles of what we're trying to do through time of use and just be clear on that, because we need to all be on board with that.
And Wendy, I'd like to expand on that, because that is what I'd like to talk about, which is in the past, this board has created many incentive rates for different technologies. Just now I mentioned battery storage and it's suddenly become the topic of discussion. This, to me, is not about any incentive. It is about fair collection and crediting for behavior. So forget the technology side. If a customer is consuming when load is low, it doesn't cost us a lot to provide them that electricity. So we should provide it at a lower cost. When everybody wants electricity and we hit those peaks, whether it be the capacity hour or those transmission hours, we should be collecting more around those hours to signal to customers that they're more expensive.
I don't disagree with that, and I think that's what our time of use is going to do. The devil in the detail of how we do it is sort of our next level of detail that we need to get into.
My greatest fear with this discussion is that it will come down to an arbitrary decision for time of use. Groton did a 4 and 40. But they just said 4 cents off, 40 on, pick some hours and threw it out there. It did not go over well. I couldn't stand in front of the public and say this time of use rate makes sense without some math to relate it to expenses. If we can relate it to costs, I can defend it and say, yeah, it might be 40 cents for the on peak, but here's why. And have math to say that, rather than we've decided that we wanted to have a big delta and tell people how to do things. That's an incentive. I want this to be fair collection. So
Yep. It goes back to
Warren.
our principle of cost of service, right? So
yes,
that's really all you're saying, right?
yes. So Warren.
Yeah, I'm relatively new on the board, so I wasn't here for all these prior discussions. So I may be saying a couple of things that folks have already agreed on previously. In general, I am very supportive of what Brian was saying in his presentation, which is that let's come up with a rate structure that is based on data representing real costs to the light plant at different times of the day. And, one of the real virtues of time of use rates, which is a reason why it seems so important to do, most of the tinkering we do with the rate structure leads to winners and losers. And for every winner, there's somebody who's going to lose. And that was like in the discussion last time, which we had about tiers. The thing that's different about time of use rates, it's a change to the rate structure that could lead to many more winners than losers, because you're doing something that reduces the total cost of electricity to the town, because you're getting people to switch their use to the time when electricity costs are lower. What other business is out there that doesn't think about its cost when it's figuring out what it's charging customers? Any other business, if their costs go up, they charge more. And so I think, so I'm not sure exactly how Brian's presentation is different than the cost of rate structure previously, but it seems like the principle we should be using is that we should be trying to make some decisions based on real data about real costs at real times.
Thank you. Pam, I saw you had some technical difficulties. Is there any, and I think you're muted.
I'm back. I was off until 7:54. I think I missed somebody's comment before, but I picked up the end of Warren's. A couple of points for me. One, I'm obviously I'm very supportive of time of use. I think we should be moving in that direction as quickly as we can. I think there is the presentation is not a surprise to me at all. The only question I have at this point is I want to make sure that the staff and Dave are in agreement with the actual what was presented, because my view is that the views of the experts are the most important views, especially in giving overviews and backgrounds like this. So I would ask Laura and Dave to just confirm with us that what we're seeing is actually the best way to give us this background, to the extent we don't have it. And I think we actually do have it. And then beyond that, to make sure that we defer or ask for decisions that are very, very complicated, that we don't need to get into, be at least presented or offered to us by the light board, the light staff itself. I mean, there are going to be many things that we really need to get them to tee up for us. We take it at the 30,000 foot level. We are the policy support to the light plant. So 2 points. One, Dave and Laura, anything you would change in what we've heard thus far, A, and B, a request that we get the input from the staff as much as we possibly can on stuff like this, so that we're right on board with them and have the benefit of their points of view. So thank you.
And Dave, apologies. Let me just give a quick comment. So the reason that I have set this agenda is to get the views of the board to help staff before they do the work. So this is all to get stuff ready to go to do the work. So Dave, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we've been supportive of time of use for a long time. We've been talking about it for a while. So we're definitely supportive of that. I think, and we'll get into this a little bit more in another topic, but we do need to update the cost of service. It's been, every 3 to 5 years you do that. We're talking about setting new rates, a new rate design. And I think, we would prefer to bring a consultant on that's progressive to help get that set up so that, the stuff that you guys are talking about right now, we have accurate data. And depending if the board decides to put stuff in different buckets, we have the data to support that. But overall, we're supportive of time of use. We want to move forward with it. I think it's important for us. We've talked about smart meters and they're scheduled to come in, and we'd like to do the pilot, which the board is interested in, or I think they are anyway. So for us to get the design of this rate structure together is important. And, I think having the updated data is important as well.
And just if I may, because Laura is probably the lead on the staff, is there any additional comments or clarifications or not?
So what I'd like to highlight is that a cost of service study is not purely a mathematical exercise, and the process of rate design is actually more of an art than a science. There's lots of science behind it. There are lots of numbers, but there are decisions that are made along the way that are somewhat arbitrary. For example, in Brian's presentation, he has proposed that we collect transmission over 4 hours and capacity over 12 hours. That's an arbitrary decision.
That is very much.
Other ways to do it. So, I strongly believe that it would be very beneficial to the light plant and to the town to engage an expert. And I know, Brian, you are supportive of the RAP group because you sent along their 2015 presentation. They've done many more studies since then. There's a 2020 update to that on progressive rate design. And, I would suggest that we take on a consultant like that to help us with the rate design. And I feel like that would be the best way to go.
And just if I may, because I initiated this conversation, Dave and Laura, would this consultant sort of happen so that we would stop time of use discussions now to get the benefit of the consultant, or would the best thing for the board be to provide the dollars for it? How do we proceed from here in your judgment based on the comments we just heard?
I think, once the board comes to consensus on the direction we're going, we certainly can engage a consultant and get that part started. But we kind of need the direction on, where you guys would like to go with the rate design itself. Okay. Laura, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Just to say that, a lot of the technical decision-making that Brian has put forth for the board to consider is something I think that, the consultant would do on your behalf. So for example, selecting the financial statements, they would select the most appropriate ones, which would probably be the last audited set, depending on where we are when we hired them. And they would make recommendations about the bucketing. The board could then review that bucketing. I will say that that's really getting in the weeds. There's a lot of FERC accounts, and it's not a simple, this FERC account goes to this bucket and this one goes to that. I've seen the cost of service studies break out individual FERC accounts into multiple buckets. for various reasons. And so it is very complicated. And I don't know if the board wants to spend its time, checking the consultant's suggestion to that level of detail.
So one of my concerns is the cost allocation process and the rate design tends to create the average customer. And because they're designing to the rate class rather than the individual and how their behavior affects the expenses. So I would like to have more insight into that process, because that is where my process differs from many of the other standard processes. So that is me. I'm in the weeds. I understand the board wants to be a little higher level, but I'd like to be able to have some input on the cost allocation process, because I want to make sure the expenses, that we get that win-win where when behavior lowers someone's bill, that it also lowers expenses to an almost equivalent degree. Wendy.
I have a question, Brian. And so Dave raises a question about what we need to give to a consultant. And my question was starting with, we did a cost of service study before. The goal of that study was also to create a model so that we could maintain cost of service. But now my question is, if we're now going down a path of engaging a consultant, how can we expedite those requirements for that consultant? Because we spent a lot of time doing that the last time we did an RFP for the cost of service study. So I'm concerned that we're now sort of going to elongate our process by hiring a consultant. So how do we accelerate and get to those core issues and decisions that we would need to put into a requirements document for a consultant? And is that what Dave, you're looking for us now? Or are you looking for just direction, hire a consultant, or are we looking for key elements of an RFP that we would need to include for a consultant?
No, just, we're just looking for the board to, be supportive of hiring a consultant to get through this. And, the cost of service that we did with Baker Tilly, it's old at this point. And I think we're looking at, a more progressive rate now than we were back then. So I think there's, other consultants that can meet the desires of the board. So that's why I was suggesting that.
So I'm fully in support of that. I also think that we should identify those issues like we did last time that we want that consultant to really work through. So is part of it's not just cost of service, but it's also new incentives that we want to bake in, right? So if you could do everything by cost of service, but then, Brian, you've introduced the concept of, do we credit customers for doing the right thing? That's a new kind of incentive, right? And that's really the hard trade-offs that are very difficult to get to. So if that's part of what we need to ask a consultant to do, that's just another different kind of piece of work that the board needs to weigh in on.
And Wendy, just for your information, I don't view the crediting of the avoided cost that is created by people pushing power to Concord Light as an incentive. I view the word incentive as shared money being put towards coaxing people to do certain activities. This would be fair cost allocation for behavior. So if someone is pushing power into the peak, well, they should receive the value of that power that if they were buying it, minus what it costs to operate the light plant, which is that distribution collection, the variable distribution, because people won't take the $70 a month.
Yeah, I guess the other side of incentive we should just be careful of, right? So we're incenting use of new technologies that are going to increase electricity usage too. So it's just, we're not solving this here, but I just think that we need to.
You'd be really great if going forward, if a rate like this existed, for the board to use rebates and bill credits as incentives, and let the rate itself be fair collection and credit for behavior.
So I think our consultant should bring those best practices to us and understand what our capabilities are, and that's the approach we should take rather than dictate what we think it should do. But let's bring the experts to the table.
Yeah, Warren.
Yeah, I think the choice of consultant is key here. We need someone who doesn't just know how to do a cost analysis, but a consultant who's really thought about time of use rates and will be helpful at coming up with the best optimal time of use rate design for us. One other thing I would love to see them do, which would be very helpful to the board in making higher level policy decisions, goes back to something Laura was saying about some of these decisions being arbitrary. Rather than have the consultant just come in and say, here's how you should structure your time of use design, I would love them to do something that says, look, you have a choice with allocating the capacity cost this way or this way. If you do it this way, here's the reason for doing it. If you do it this other way, here's the reason for doing it that way. In that case, we can make intelligent decisions because we know the implications of the different choices.
I totally agree. I think that is I would not want a consultant to go off with a scope of work and then come back and say, here's a rate schedule and up or down vote. I would like to be able to get their input on different strategies for how that rate could be designed and use their expertise in that manner. That's a great suggestion. Alice.
So there are 2 points that I think are relevant. I'm hearing that the board is supportive of bringing in a progressive consultant to help us design the time of use rates. And I think it would be worth doing a straw vote on that so that we know we're giving direction to the light plant about whether we support it. But I would also suggest that there be parallel paths, that the board can work on the things that it wants to have, what it wants to see in the time of use rate structure, that because there's a time lag between the time the light plant decides they're going to go off and write the scope of work for a consultant and the time the consultant comes on. I'm going to guess even in the shortest amount of time, we're talking a couple, 2-3 months, that's time the board can be using to kind of frame the questions we want them to answer in the development of the time of use rates. I wouldn't want to see it a sequential process. We come up with what we want to see in it, and then they bid on it, and then they give us only what our thinking was at the last vote. So I'm thinking we do both simultaneously. We vote that the light plant move forward with finding the progressive rate structure, a consultant to work with us while we are honing it a little bit more on what we want to think about and have the consultants think for us in designing the rate. So that's the first thing, is this parallel structure and move it both forward. The other thing I do keep hearing is that the cost of power will be a driver of behavior change. And the studies that I have read over the last 6 years, so not that long, 4 years maybe, and that we talked about at this board, have not supported that price incentives are drivers of behavior change on a mass scale. There are some people that will do that for the common good, for the benefit of the community, but not the price driver itself, because most people are not looking at their cost of power and their cost to them over the course of every 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever in a day, to make decisions about their behavior. And it's just not borne out that those rates, those price incentives drive behavior change. And we at the light board and light plant have seen that as well. We've had incentives that the cost of electricity goes up with the amount that you use. If you are, there are 3 categories of electricity use. People are not changing their behavior. Their lifestyle is, not amenable to, or maybe it's inelastic to those changes in the cost structure, that they prefer a lifestyle over the cost of power, that it's not the driving factor. And so I don't want us to, we're hearing a lot today on this being an incentive to drive behavior change. And I just don't think that that's borne out in any of the studies that we've read.
Again, this is fair collection for behavior, not an incentive, at least in my eyes. This is not about, I hope that people change their behavior based on cost signals, but if they don't, we're collecting for their behavior. So that is what I hope happens, because that way those that do change their behavior and want to engage see the value in doing so, and those that don't pay their own way. So Warren.
Yeah, two things. One, under the Inflation Reduction Act and other federal programs, there's potentially more opportunity for technical assistance that the light plan could tap into, and it may be possible to get some consulting help without having to pay for it. I would be happy to ask a member of my staff who tracks some of those programs to see if there's anything we could tap into. It would be probably supplementary to a consultant we hired, but it maybe would get some of the work done. And I would look to Dave if he wants me to look at that.
Yeah,
that was my first comment. The second thing, on Alice's point, I think she's very right that there have been studies that have said in the past that time of use rates don't drive behavior or only capture a minority of behavior. But first of all, even the minority, influencing a minority of customers is still influencing some customers. And secondly, there's a new paper that came out from MIT just last week making the case of time of use rates. And I'd be happy to share that with the board after this meeting. It's a short paper, and they argue more strongly for time of use rates because they think now there are reasons why it can and will drive more behavior than it has in the past.
Thanks. Laura.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide some data. CMLP has had a time of use rate now for some time. And granted, there are not a lot of people on it, but the people who are on it, the last time I looked, 94% of the energy they used on that rate was in the off-peak and 6% was in the on-peak. Granted, there are people who signed up for the program, so they're very motivated. Many of them are using it for car charging. A handful are using it for their whole house. So it's not going to be representative of the general public, but I did just want to provide those statistics that show people who are motivated, will use it.
Yeah, that's great. Pam.
I just want, I guess I think the Alice's point on inelasticity is true. I also think that we're really trying to influence, just be fair, I think, fundamentally, and also be fundamentally progressive in terms of establishing the basic building blocks of a responsible structure for the future. So my question, Brian, is does anybody detect any difference on the board with respect to time of use itself? I mean, I don't think there's any disagreement, and I would like to, if there is, I just want to just dispose of that. I think this board is deeply in favor of time of use, and the question is just how do we get all set up in time for the devices being available to us. So, Brian, if you think we need to vote on time of use itself as the way to go, we should do that. But otherwise, I think we should just assume we're all on board on that.
We already have it in our strategic plan that we're going to have a default time of use. It's all over our reports and goals that we're doing. Time of use.
So I don't. So we don't even need to talk about it, right?
Well, every time I bring up time of use, we get into a circle of who should be doing what. And that's why I set this agenda and just threw something out there for everybody to tell me what's wrong with it, is because I want to get past the, big sky questions and start to get to these questions about, well, really, what should time of use look like? And that was what this agenda was designed to get from you guys, so that before we engage staff and we engage a consultant, potentially, that we have some idea of your thoughts and feelings about this. I mean, I have a thought that this should be fair cost recovery and not an incentive, but Others may feel it should be incentivizing behavior. This is the kind of information I'm hoping to get from the board so that we don't waste a lot of time later in the process doing a bunch of work to prepare something. And then the board goes, well, why didn't you think about this or think of it that way? I'm trying to get that stuff flushed out in this meeting.
Brian,
But
I
there's
think-
no issue about whether or not, right? There's no difference. Nobody has any concerns about that. Okay.
We're doing time use. I just hope it's not arbitrary. That's
But
my
I think our
biggest
goal is
concern.
to hire a consultant, right, and inform our decision making. And I love the idea that Alice has around doing some work in parallel to that.
Okay.
I think the board wants an unbiased perspective on our implementation and to leverage
So-
the experts.
So I have a fear that I'm going to write some agenda topics that are work to do on time of use in parallel, and you'll tell me it's not appropriate for the board. So can you give me some idea of what those topics in your mind would
Fixed
be?
rate, like we should figure out the fixed rate independent of that. I mean, we need to set some expectation, right? You've said $70, but we can work through some element of fixed from a
Okay.
principle. How far do we want to go? And I don't know, Laura, these are issues that we've been talking about for a long time, that the time of use itself will say we have to make some decision, because how much of fixed use would we want in the short term to still be covered through some variable cost? And then we have some very specific rates that we need to decide whether we want to even continue them, right? The load control issues, right? We can talk about that, right? That, do we
Okay.
want to continue that? Those are just my top of the head, but I'm sure that Laura and others have better ideas.
No, those are great. If Alice, do you have more to add to that list?
Well, I agree with Wendy, and I think those are conversations that the board has had on an ongoing process, and I'd like to continue them. I personally do not want to get deep into the weeds of looking at every line item in our budget and making an assumption about which category it goes in. I think Laura's recommendation was a good one. When we hire the consultant that we feel good about, have them justify why we're doing it one way or another way and allow us to respond to it. I don't want to do a line item cost allocation study of my own. It's just not how I'm going. I want to spend my time or my expertise, and I actually don't have that kind of expertise because there are bigger questions involved. It's not a straightforward decision. There are some other choices and factors that come into how we allocate those funds.
Right.
I think the cost of service study that we did had a progressive plan for how we would collect the fixed costs. And I think that's also something we want to do. It doesn't happen all at once on one day. We had a phased in approach for how we would continually raise the fixed costs. So those are all things that I'm feeling strongly about. And I just wanted to tell you that.
Agenda topic 6, if we get to it, is basically, it's not going through the expenses, but it is kind of giving guidance on how to organize the expenses for the board, how the board views it. So when we get there, we'll do that. But I'm not going to have the board go line by line through expenses. But I do want them to get a sense of how do we want to fairly recover for expenses based on some high level parameters. Pam.
Yeah, I just want, in an effort to move things along, and I think this has been very valuable conversation. I guess my theme often is, let's go to the staff and ask the staff for help on something. And I think maybe even the parallel agenda, the parallel issues for discussion, maybe they could be teed up initially, at least for our discussion, by the staff. The staff listens very hard to our problems, knows things very well. I wouldn't mind saying here from Dave and Laura, here are the 5 things you really can help us on as we work towards actually engaging a consultant. So my suggestion would be, let's talk about this a little bit, but let's then ask the staff and Dave to come back at us with here are the things we think you should be doing in parallel, as Alice said. I also agree with Alice, and I think it'd be foolhardy for us not to agree with Alice on the point that we are not the experts here. We are not the experts here. So my big suggestion is let's get some input from the staff on what we should be working on in parallel, to use Alice's term.
Right. And the reason that I kind of led this agenda is because staff has quite a lot on their plate. And, it would be great if staff had infinite time, but we've got the solar project, we've got, we're going to talk about nuclear, we've got many other topics that they're working on, as well as their normal jobs. So I fully agree. We'll involve staff.
Can I just say something on that, Brian, which is another theme? The inherent functions of the light staff and the light plant have to be teased out by this board. We cannot offload issues of workload, et cetera, in this way, when in the ultimate game of things, it will create inefficiencies and distort the needs of the light plant itself. So I think if we need help from the light plant, we should get it. We'll usually enjoy efficiencies from having done that. And moreover, we will not obfuscate any real staffing problems that may exist at the plant, which we want to help them on.
By the way, we added staff to help with these kind of strategic issues. So we haven't done it yet. I'm just in the budget. I'm just acknowledging, right?
Okay.
So we recognize we needed more expertise.
No one here yet.
Right. I know, but I think, that's why we asked for it. So,
Well, I've let this discussion go on well past the timing on the agenda. I thought it was a great discussion. I'm going to go hopefully a little quickly because I do want to end by 9, and that's a little more than half an hour from now. So the next agenda topic was definitions and vocabulary. This was to inform the board, remind board of terminology, because we're going to talk about time of use. This is, got many different things. I've heard the definitions or the usage of fixed and variable change over time with the board for different meanings. I view it as a method of collection, not a category of expenses. So people have taken fixed to mean operational cost, and that's not the way I view it. So I just wanted to make sure those definitions were available to the board. Again, there was 2 documents sent. One was a wrap glossary. The other was definitions that we had worked on previously but had not completed. Financial statements. I wanted to get from staff which financial statements they'd like to use. And it sounds, just in time, it sounds like the audited financials are what you'd like to use, Dave. Is that correct?
Yeah. So when we go through a process like this, we use the last audited financials. So at today's rate, we'd be using the 2021 audited financials. If we went out, in 3 or 4 months and the 22 were done, we would use those. But right now, things would be based on the 2021 financial statements.
Right.
Dave, how much risk is there by not using the audited financials, right? Because you lose a whole year of data in that process. I'm just, ideally, you'd like to use more current data if you could.
That's the kind of conversation I wanted to have. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a little risk for sure. Each year is a little different. But using the last audited financial statements is a pretty standard practice.
Yep.
And it's one we follow for a long time. We could use our internal ones that aren't audited. And, as you guys have seen in the past, what's reported changes when the audited comes out. So that's the risk you face if you use unaudited financials.
Yeah. How
Maybe
well
it's a consideration, right, for next steps. You can consider it. I don't know where we're at in the financials. I know we just closed, we just passed the new year and you're just starting the audit process. So
Matt, do you want to give a quick update on that?
your systems are tighter now than they've ever been. So
we just closed October 2022 in our financial system. So we would essentially be through September as far as a board financial statement. there are risks. We have a little bit of lag with the expenses, so that some of those expenses could still hit some of those months that are in the past. We are scheduled as far as our audit for field work to begin in April. We've been kind of given a guarantee this year that they're not going to let it drag as far as it went last year. So I'm hoping to be done around the end of May with the 22 audit.
So Matt, if this becomes a routine where we are using a financial statement that's audited, the completed audited statement comes out around May. So that if we were to be setting rates in November, December for a January rate structure, we could use the audited financials that were 2 years old. Is that correct?
Yes.
And
Yep.
so I wanted to ask Dave, well, and Laura, if the load curves are more, up to date. So using a year-old set of costs and applying that to the load curve from 2 years ago, would you feel comfortable predicting a collection rate based on those values, or would you want something more recent? Like I know the forecasted the operating forecast comes out when we're setting rates, and it's more timely, but it's also an estimate. So if we
Just to
get
be
into
clear,
it,
Brian, when the
Yeah.
cost of service study is done, we don't just take the past and assume it's going to repeat. I mean, we provide 5-year, capital expenditure, power supply forecast to it. So when we prepare a 5-year rate forecast, it's based on forward estimates of what we believe is going to happen in the future, as imperfect as those are.
yes, but as
Pretty accurate for 2022. If given that how you do projections, you would bake into it as much knowledge you have about 2022. If we're saying we're going to use 2021, right, and we do forecast, you're obviously going to leverage 22.
Correct.
So
Yep.
it's pretty tight then. I mean, that's not a bad approach, right? And it's the outer years that become less precise.
all right, Pam.
Just quickly, just on the definitions, to me, it seems that, I can't imagine we have differences of opinion. If we do, we should have a standard set of definitions that the board agrees upon. And that's my only suggestion. If we don't have a standard set of understandings on key terms, we had better have one. And so if we could just clarify that at some point that we do have such an agreement, that would make it very simple. So.
Yeah, so the Word document is a past effort at creating a standard set of definitions. But it was I don't feel it's up to date and maybe incomplete. We worked on it at one meeting and said we were going to follow up on it and then never did. So that's where we are with that document.
Well, could we have the light staff create what they believe is a standard set, or could we get a standard set from the
I believe
Massachusetts?
that was what was done.
What?
That was what was done. And then we didn't do the review.
So what's been distributed came from staff, and you're
Correct.
now asking us to review it? Okay.
So you're-
No, I wasn't making an ask to review it because we don't have time on our schedule of things to do to prioritize that.
But I would say that the definition of fixed cost is important because it relates to that meter charge, right? So we just need to have a common understanding of expectations around that one in particular, because that's one
Okay.
of our key decisions.
I agree. On key things, we should have a shared understanding of definitions going forward.
Yeah. So the definition of fixed costs in the two documents are wildly different. So we do need to do that.
And in this context, it's for rates, right? So it's important.
And those-
Audited financials will be different potentially.
Yeah.
And the two documents that you're referring to is the RAP document and the CMLP department document.
Correct.
And what you want to do is review just the one, what is a fixed cost, and see if we philosophically believe what the light plant's approach is, or we go at a consultant's view.
Yes, that's what Wendy suggested, and I think it's
I
appropriate.
just confirming so I understood.
Yeah.
It's hard to hear Wendy, so I just needed
That's-
to make sure I
yeah.
Sorry,
understood.
yeah, it's my headset.
And that's maybe a select number of key terms, but I do want to keep it short because we go over the entire list, we'll be here
No.
forever. Okay, so let me see if I can summarize on the financial statements. So the use of the audited, the latest audited financial statements and the time frame that covers when we look at load and number of customers would be appropriate for the board when we talk about doing an analysis of this, any kind of time of use rate. You agree, Dave?
I do.
All right, so I do want to have a quick discussion about how do we categorize expenses. So a cost allocation can start with saying, oh, well, this much is in this rate class and that much is accredited for that rate class. One of the big drivers I'd like to see in deciding which go towards the variable or non-distribution areas are those that a customer can affect. So a customer can conserve, can use less. A customer can shift in load for when it's on or off peak. And we have that sounds simple at the first offset, like capacity and transmission. But when you look at things like the Watson contract, where we have this contract, we have it a lot for capacity, but it's a fixed contract. So I see in the annual review, these things get labeled as fixed in the power supply. But if we have enough demand for capacity that it really wouldn't change, but capacity itself is set by behavior. So I want to make sure that Watson contract lands more in the capacity bucket than it does in a fixed distribution cost or operating cost of the light plant. So I wanted to get input from you from Laura on how we can look at our contracts and parse them, whether they be for, we have got contracts that are both energy and capacity, and they have one value. So how would we look at that? And other such. So how should we look at what a customer can affect? Should it be the total cost we've incurred or the way we've contracted to meet that cost? Does that make any
I'm
sense?
not sure I understand the question. I've been a fan for years, Brian, of putting most of the Watson costs in the capacity bucket. They used to be labeled as fixed, and I've been trying to migrate that. So we're on the same page there. But even a contract like Watson has many components to it. We've got payments, fixed O&M that we have to pay every month, whether we use it or not. Right. And a customer's behavior is not going to affect that. However, we also burn energy in that unit when it runs, and customer behavior definitely affects that. So these are why these issues are complex and have to be looked at, in detail.
Yeah, but the whole purpose of having the Watson contract is to meet our capacity obligation.
Not the whole purpose. We get energy from it.
Right. So I would like to look at it as not the consumption side, but more of why we have that contract. We have it 90% for capacity, 10% for energy, or vice versa. And make sure that those costs end up in the right bucket when we design the rate, such that when we credit people for capacity, we're crediting them for the correct things. We're not giving them a small credit because we're only this much into the forward capacity market, which is where we're the variable is exposure because we've got these contracts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't know where you come up with the 90-10.
That was just those aren't exact numbers. That was an example.
Well, but how would you do that?
That's my question to you: is how do you think we could approach dividing the contract accordingly?
To me, you categorize the expenses according to how they are incurred and whether a customer's behavior can affect it. So I just gave an example where we pay fixed O&M for that resource, which is pretty significant, and whether we run it or not, we pay that cost. And so that could be put in the capacity bucket, but it's certainly not going to be put in the energy bucket.
Great. That makes sense to me. Warren, you have a thought? Oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry. I think in some ways this is getting a little too much into the weeds for a discussion here. And I don't think we should be going through random contracts arbitrarily. And what I would rather see at some point would be, a list drawn up of here are expenses that it's unclear where they go. And we have to decide which bucket they go into and look at that holistically, and also look at the cost implication of some of those decisions. There may be something we could spend a lot of time futzing over whether it goes here or there, but the actual impact on rates would be minimal, and we just shouldn't worry about it too much.
That's a good suggestion. So why don't we do that? We'll go through the expenses and see what's easy, and then come back to the board if something is difficult or are unsure.
So are you asking the staff, Brian, to go through the expenses and in their opinion, tell you which ones could be challenging?
Yes, because the board doesn't want to go through the details. So I'm willing to help you and sit down with that one. But I think I'm getting a sense from the board that they want to understand if customer behavior can affect an expense, it should be in one bucket versus one where they can't affect expense, and that's in another. Does that make sense, Laura?
But can I ask a question? Like, why are we asking Laura to do something? We're going to hire a consultant to bring some of these questions to us, right?
Yeah.
So why are we getting ahead of this? We should have the consultant. This is the type of issue the consultant should say, here's a decision point, right? And here's the pro and the con either way.
I agree.
That's what I think should happen.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Alice?
I'm sorry, I should lower my hand. That I had the same comment as Wendy. That she said it eloquently. I'm with her.
Wait, what did she say? What?
We are hiring a consultant to work on the rate structure for us. They have made several proposals and how they would make several proposals of why they're putting things in certain buckets, and for us to respond to that rather than for us to pre-think and tell them how we want that rate structure to look like. Exactly. So for example, Brian's Watson contract, how much of that should be a fixed cost and how much is a variable cost? That is a subjective look at how we allocate those costs. And I'd like to hear a consultant's review of why it's one way versus another, because Brian has a very strong opinion about how that should be looked at. We may not all share that. And in the end, it doesn't really affect the individual's bill. They are cost neutral in how we allocate. So it's not really a cost savings to an individual. If we are trying to do it as a mathematical understanding of the impact of customer behavior, that may be one reason to do it if we think that that's an important measure for us to understand the value or importance of customer use and customer behavior.
I disagree with the end part of that statement, but we'll Ham.
I just wanted, looking forward at the progress of this board generally, there are a couple of things that have been coming up. One is the board willing to get into the weeds versus is the board irresponsible to get into the weeds? And I think going forward, we have a very important job to recognize when do you hold them and when do you fold them? This board should not be attempting to get into very complex things that are very subtle and require training.
We've already agreed to do the consultant, and we've agreed to go in a direction of getting the experts in. I'm just asking for guidance here.
I understand it, but I think there's a real art in figuring out, what level we play at. And I think we're hearing people say, Warren, Alice, me, that there needs to be a discerning view of what is our best use in this board. And I'm just encouraging us to keep doing that. And the reliance on the consultant and teeing up the consultant in a responsible way is probably the best thing we can do right now.
Yes, and the guidance we give in this meeting will go a long way to teeing that up well. Laura.
I just wanted to answer Alice's point. I think, Alice, one of the reasons, and Brian, you can correct me if I'm wrong, one of the reasons Brian is so keen to be very careful about what goes in distribution and what goes in transmission is because he's assumed that the board is going to accept the proposal he's made for net metering crediting. And what he's done there is he said that all solar customers will pay all distribution costs. They won't get credited the distribution, but they will be credited the capacity. So for solar net metered customers, the distinction will make a difference.
Yes, thank you. That was perfect, Laura. That was exactly my concern with that statement. All right. Laura, do you still have another statement, or are you okay?
Sorry, I'll lower my hand.
All right. So just because we have less than 15 minutes, the next thing on the agenda was example customers. So we're hiring a consultant, so we can assume we can do a lot more customers as examples. This was originally on the agenda, assuming that we wanted to cherry pick, 10 customer types and examples to do the analysis against, to see how it affects customer bills. Because I know once we design a rate structure, even if it is mathematically fair, we will have some kind of transition to go through where we have ETS customers that pay very little distribution, suddenly paying off peak, which includes distribution and energy. So the only suggestion I had here was to make sure that the examples included what we see on the MWAC comparisons, that 250 kilowatt customer, the 500, 750, and 1000, as well as some of our more complicated customers that have ETS and an EV and solar all on one account. How would their bills change? So we can understand these, and also understand the residential assistance rate and how that affects those customers with this new time of use. These are some of the examples that I thought we should include. And now that we're doing a cost of service study, we basically can do a lot more of these kinds of examples. Pam.
Just as we wrap up, I think because we've had some hiccups in the past about thinking we had agreement on things that we didn't, I would like, Brian, would you mind before we close the meeting, and partly for minutes and partly for going forward, could we just capture those things that we have really agreed upon in this meeting? Like, we know that we want to go for time of use. We know we want a consultant. What are the big ticket items here that we have actually agreed upon, if you wouldn't mind? At some point.
Yeah, and I do, I welcome the board to correct me, because I'm going to give you my summary and it's probably not going to be perfect. So please correct it now. So yes, we want to do a consultant. We are doing time of use. I have expressed concerns about it being arbitrary and want it related to expenses. I don't know if that's agreement amongst the board. We're going to use the 2021 audited financials. Warren had offered to look into any kind of federal money that we might be able to get to help with the consultant. We want to have another topic in an upcoming meeting to discuss the definition of fixed and variable and some other key and often used terms, so that we find agreement on the definitions. So we want to have the consultant go through the expenses with an eye to those that can be affected by customer behavior and those that cannot. And that's at a high level, I've expressed concern about making sure those go in the capacity or the transmission bucket, but I again don't know if there's consensus. Does that seem like a good summary? Is there anything that I missed or left out that you'd like to add? I don't hear any. Okay.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Thank you.
And this is the kind of guidance that staff will need to hire a consultant to start work, to know where the board wants to go with this. I appreciate your input. It's very helpful. And so, is there any other final comments from the board before I go on to liaison and public comments? I don't see
Talked
any.
about is some decisions that we could work on in parallel, right? So fixed cost was one of them. And if there are other key issues that the staff might think that we could work on from just a philosophical, like if you need input from the board, I think that those are topics that we should discuss further.
We can send out a list of
Yep.
stuff that you guys can be working on in parallel.
Great.
That
Well,
would be
Laura
nice.
did a year ago, so maybe just pick that one back up again. Right.
Yep.
Excellent. So public and liaison comments. Pamela Dritt.
Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord. Thank you for talking about these things are important, but I don't think you did it yet. And please give us the darn handouts. This is not just for the board's benefit, it's for the public. We can't make intelligent comments if we don't have something to comment on, just like the board doesn't. Put it online so that there's a link in the agenda, like other town boards do, like the select board, like the planning board, like the zoning board of appeals, so that we can look at your packet, please.
Okay,
And-
so it's a good suggestion. I will forward my presentation and the definitions, and you'll have the content that was sent out prior.
I was looking forward to your set of customer type examples, and we didn't get that.
Yeah, well, because we're doing all of them, the cost of service study will cover all those examples.
Yeah, but it would be better for me to know what sort of divisions you put customers into as a starting point. Just more information is better, please.
Okay.
Because I think the power to set prices is the power to influence what people do. Alice, it does do it, even if it's not clear in the studies that people look at, because even economists don't agree on how economics works. And they talk about nudging people on the margin. Just looking at how California is dealing with solar and the utilities, it's clear that policy changes how people behave. We want to incentivize. You can't get away from incentivizing with what you do with pricing. Like Warren said.
Okay, I want to move on to Mark.
No, but I haven't even gotten to, we need to, what are our overall goals that we need a fair system to design for? Don't we have to use our pricing to incentivize the electrification of everything?
I would say that I want fair cost recovery. The ISO has created the RNS fees and capacity fees in '97 to address those spikes in demand. We're just passing on those signals to our customers and not absorbing them with the average customer. That's my hope. But again, this is going to be a larger process.
The definition of fair
Yes, that would be
You
fair.
haven't-
So It-
I don't think, I don't quite understand what you meant there.
well,
But I don't see how what is your definition of fair? That's-
all right. Well, I can't do it back and forth right now in the meeting. But again, we can sit down and talk. I'll
I
text.
I need to send you guys a letter.
Yes, that would be helpful. Thank you. Mark,
Thanks very much. By the way, on your list of things, I think you agreed to the comment about what rates to continue using and what rates to be discontinued. I thought I heard some consensus that that was a topic that you might want to prepare for. And I would also add to that list one that's come up in previous meetings, which is, how quickly to move in the direction of the fixed cost recovery. That was an overhang from the last cost of service study. There was, I think the math indicated that the fixed cost recovery might need to be quite a bit higher than it was, and there was an agreement to go gradually towards that, and the record on that. So I would encourage, those are the kinds of decisions that I think that you guys can consider in advance of whatever the consultant goes through. Also, there was a lot of talk about the consultant as though it was singular, but I would note that a consultant that's experienced in time of use rate development might or might not be the same consultant that one would use for a cost of service study. So I think that it probably makes sense to make sure that, in the process of procuring consulting assistance for staff, kind of get clear on, are you looking for one consultant to do both, or are you looking for two consultants? The opportunity, of course, when you have more than one consultant is then you get a couple of different opinions that can be considered. Of course, that's more complicated to handle too. So I would just mention those things as things to consider around preparation. Another one around preparation for time of use is when the meters go out, there's an opportunity to start collecting data on behavior as it exists today under the current rate structure and developing a much more fine-grained load curves for different kinds of customers. And so the opportunity to do customer segmentation, we know that some people are much more engaged than others. And I think that it might be important to try to decide how many different kinds of time of use rates are we going to have. Some customers may prefer very simple, sort of traditional looking rate structures. Maybe there are people that haven't changed very much, or other customers who've engaged with heat pumps, engaged with electric vehicles, or maybe considering other actions like solar may want different plans. And I think it's your responsibility as a board to really try to understand what the community is looking to do, and recognize that there may not be a one size fits all. Those people that are more engaged may want to have finer grained control. I would be interested if Laura could expand on her example around the existing time of use customers. She mentioned the breakdown of the load off-peak versus peak, but how much demand do they actually represent? Are they disproportionately using electricity compared to an average customer, or are they greater or less? My suspicion is that they probably use more electricity than their average, than an average customers. So those are the kinds of things that I would suggest thinking about and in preparation, and the implementation of how to prepare is also important. It may be useful to even consider some services around surveys to try to find out, if hypothetically I could get a time of use rate that, had this sort of time frames or that, 10 times or even 15 times more cost for the peak rates, would I do that? And what sort of communications is going to be there? It might be worth it to try to gauge whether, Concord's community is interested in doing that. And I realize that we can't do a lot of back and forth now, so those are just my comments. And I'm happy to let you move on to the next commenter.
Thank you, Mark. You're describing an incentive structure using a rates, and that's something that I would oppose, because I want this to be about cost recovery and reward based on expenses, and I want the expenses to lead rather than the incentive to get the technology. We can still incentivize technology, but I'd rather do it with bill credits and rebates outside of the rate structure.
So that is a little bit of a mischaracterization, Brian.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, as an EV owner or as a heat pump user, I've made certain decisions that have implications on what my electric bill is. And I might be looking for an electric service plan that reflects the choices that I've already made, because I'm acting economically rationally for me. And what I'm trying to say is, as the light board, as citizens, your job to some extent is to also consider what economically rational consumers are likely to desire. Do they want to have choices in plans, or do they want to have one plan only? Those are the kinds of decisions that I'm suggesting the light board engage with.
Okay, thank you.
Brian,
Yes.
I want to, speaking as the clerk here, I encourage the public to put things in writing. If you have serious comments to make, and some of them are extremely valuable, it will be much, much more accurate for us to have a letter from you that we can attach to the minutes. So, Mark, excellent comments. Pamela, you often make excellent comments. So if you want to have, a real reflection of your thoughts, don't hesitate to write to us.
Thanks. I've written these down, so I will do that. One other thing, just really quickly, the definitions and vocabularies document that you were talking about, I strongly urge you to put that on the light board page. And I also can't stress enough, I've made this comment before, the materials, the presentation that you did earlier, Brian, is not available to us in advance or even during the meeting. And therefore, we're trying to read as fast as we can, but don't really have an opportunity to review those materials. And I think that it's behooves staff to get those things out and onto the website so that they can be downloaded by the interested public.
Excellent. All right, thank you, Mark. David Allen.
You will not be surprised to hear from me about fixed cost. Before I go there, if I might, contrary to my usual, if I could go back very fleetingly over 3 points that came up in an earlier comment here, in reverse order. Goals. Since you are the board, I think there is no higher priority task for this board than to set out, first of all, what are the goals of this rate setting process that you intend to achieve. Without that, as we know, any road will take you there. On whether or not rates incentivize electricity users, economists particularly value research done with data, and those data show that by and large, and Alice, of course, has brought this home, rates do not incentivize users. There are exceptions, and Laura very usefully gave us an example here. We need to use facts, not wishful thinking. And on this issue of transparency by the board, which Mark has also touched upon, there's no more bottom line requirement for a board in a government setting like this than that you be open and transparent. It may take some change on the website to make these materials available, but it is crucial. Please, let's move in that direction. Finally, on fixed costs. Sorry, it's taking a little bit to get here. As has been said, quite a number of times before. This is a topic that's been on the griddle for over a decade now. I was there, as you're aware, I've been there for a lot longer than that. Points also been made by me, among others, that raising up to the $70 doesn't change the collection because rates don't change. What we have acknowledged practically from the beginning, more than a decade ago, it will impact some of the lower volume users in ways that are unacceptable, and adjustments will have to be made for them. To translate all of that, there is no excuse for not going to the $70 now. There is no value in edging our way up to it. Once you get to the $70, if it's another decade from now, you'll still have to make that adjustment for the lower volume users. Put it most bluntly, it is a fundamental mistake not to go to the $70 now. You will have to make that adjustment for the lower volume users. As Brian pointed out in his presentation, there will be some exception cases, and this would be one of those, kind of scheme that Brian has usually suggested for us. As usual, thanks for your work.
Great. Thank you, David. Any other public comments? Could I have a motion to adjourn then?
Make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Great. Do I have a second?
I second.
We got Warren gave a second. Pam. Okay. And Alice,
Yes.
Warren,
Yes.
and Wendy.
Yes,
And I agree. Thank you all. Have a
Thank
good
you.
day.
Good.
great.